The next step then is not governance analysis, that's tomorrow. As you can see, I was looking at governance analysis, but make sure we do it tomorrow, and it's there, ready. The next session is around developing goals. So it's the second step in this four-step process. So we're going to look at what a goal is and what an objective is, because they're quite different things, and some people sometimes mix them up. We're going to just briefly touch on this idea of the difference between goals and ecosystem quality objectives. And, there's some things we discussed there, and then we'll look at the process again. So, what are goals, objectives, and actions? They're kind of three words that are often used. And what I should say here is that virtually every strategic action programme that I've looked at uses different terminology in different ways. So the way we're going to be doing it is we're going to be looking at goals, objectives and actions, but I've seen projects that use targets rather than goals, essentially it's the same thing. Sometimes they don't even have objectives, they have actions. Other projects use objectives first and don't have goals as such, they use ecosystem quality objectives. So there's a whole range of language out there around this. And I'm sure any of you that have done any action planning know this, because it depends on the plan that you're trying to develop and so on and so forth. But for the sake of what we're doing here, goals and objectives. Goals are generally guidelines that explain what you want to achieve in your water system. They're usually long-term and represent some kind of global vision, such as reduced pollution by, or increased biodiversity by. Okay, so they're kind of top level. They're not as high level as the vision, then the next step down, but they are kind of bigger statements, and they don't necessarily have completion dates and timeframes associated with them. Objectives define strategies or implementation steps to attain the identified goals. Unlike goals, objectives need to be much more specific, they need to be measurable, and they should have a defined completion date. And there's this whole area around objectives called SMART objectives. Some of you might have come across that acronym. There might be a different one here, but SMART is about making sure that they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-oriented. And if you just go onto the web, search in Google for SMART, you will come across SMART objectives. And there are different acronyms for it, all around SMART, but sometimes the letters mean different things. But generally, we're talking about things that are measurable here, objectives. Shall I just finish this one off then? Actions. Often each objective is associated with a series of actions. Therefore, implementing a strategic goal typically involves implementing a series of actions along the way. So the goal is the vision is the top level. The goal is a series of goals to achieve that vision. There are a series of time-defined objectives to achieving a goal, and each objective may have a series of actions, very specific actions, to actually meet an objective. Is that? I think it's fairly logical and very straightforward.
Martín, me parece a mí que aquí hay que profundizar un poquitito en la discusión, porque en los países me parece que hay un tema cultural acá, ¿cómo se entiende? Porque traduciendo esto en castellano son metas, objetivos y acciones. Y acá se entiende que los objetivos son más generales que las metas. Sospechazo. Entonces, incluso dentro del plano del entrenamiento, entendemos esto porque después lo que nosotros escribamos va a confundir en las otras esferas. Entonces necesitamos armonizar acá la...
Absolutely, a very, very good point. This is going to need to be culturally specific and language specific. And that's probably why they're very different from one SAP to another, because they take into account the language and the way people understand things. So yeah, for the sake of argument for this training, if we just stick to goal, objective, actions, because you understand what they mean, but for further discussion around the SAP, this is going to need to be refined so that it meets the need. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, I completely get that. Yeah, absolutely. So, in the context of the SAP then, goals are long-term targets to achieve the vision and reduce the impact of each transboundary project, each transboundary problem. Conversely, the objectives are strategies or implementation steps to achieve the goal. Okay? So, I guess many of you have come across ecosystem quality objectives. Yeah, it's not an alien term to you. Ecosystem quality objectives. You've come across this terminology. Eco-QOs. Yeah, there's a general understanding, okay. So, a number of projects have used ecosystem quality objectives. Mostly, interestingly, considering that LMEs are about ecosystems, most LMEs don't use ecosystem quality objectives. Most use goals and targets. Many rivers have used the ecosystem quality objective approach. So it's interesting because you can imagine it would be the exact opposite. So if we look at goals and objectives, the goal and objective approach, if we call it that, is really classic strategic planning. That's what most strategic plans have, something around goals and targets and objectives or actions. They generally comprise longer-term goals or targets, followed by shorter-term objectives or activities. Like I've said, more often than not, although not exclusively, they've been used by LME projects. And examples of that include the Guinea Current Large Marine Ecosystem in the Mediterranean, South China Sea, LME, and the Mekong River Basin isn't the LME. But then, just to give some examples. Ecosystem quality objectives, sometimes referred to as environmental quality objectives or water resource objectives, tend to comprise of a long-term eco-QO, a long-term ecosystem quality objective, followed by shorter-term targets. So it kind of reverses the terminology, but it is just terminology in a sense.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, it's only to emphasize that in the picture that we have here.
The picture that we have in Spanish, the concept of transitory planning is missing to the translation, and in my regard, that is an important point. It's not well addressed here in the Spanish.
Okay. So could you?
I'm sorry, I'm missing this one.
That's okay. It's okay. That's fine. So ecosystem quality objectives comprise of longer-term eco-QOs followed by shorter-term targets. They're generally been used by projects focused on enclosed seas, freshwater groundwater systems. So not LMEs as such, but like the Caspian Sea, which is an LME, but it wasn't an LME project. Or the Black Sea, which is could be considered to be an LME, but the project wasn't an LME project. So Caspian, the river, the Dnipro River Basin, the Black Sea, Lake Victoria, Lake Chad, Western Indian Ocean, Nubian Aquifer. So these are two different approaches. They're complementary, they're not at odds with each other. They're just different ways of doing it. And it's for a project to decide at some point whether it wants to go one route or the other, essentially. I don't think either is wrong or right. And in fact, it's just a framework. The important thing is what's inside the framework. So I'm just going to give you an example of some. This is quite a recent project. This is the Yellow Sea Large Marine Ecosystem. I think this is. Let me just have a look. I've got a document here. I think it's 2008. Though it's remarkable, it's a strategic action programme, it doesn't have the data in front of it. 2009. Okay, so this is a fairly recent project that's completed the SAP. The Yellow Sea Large Marine Ecosystem Project is China. We had this conversation. What are the countries? China, Thailand, and Vietnam.
The Yellow Sea is South Korea and China.
Sorry, of course it is. No, I'm confused with you. Yeah, South Korea and China. They're the two countries involved in this. And it's been held up as a very good example of a project. So, and it's also, in a way, analogous to this project, a two-country project. So let's go back to here. So these are the, I call them goals. In the actual document they call them targets, but targets and goals are essentially the same thing. So these are the goals for the Yellow Sea Large Marine Ecosystem. Goal 1, 25 to 30% reduction in fishery effort. Goal 2, rebuilding of overexploited marine living resources. Goal 3, improvement of mariculture techniques to reduce environmental stress. Goal 4, meeting international requirements on contaminants. Goal 5, reduction of total loading of nutrients from 2006 levels. And so on and so forth. There's a number here. I won't read them all out. Something about marine litter, contaminants, ecosystem changes for adaptive management, genetic diversity, risk of introduction of reduction of the risk of introduced species. So this is these are examples of goals for an LME. So just giving you a heads up on that. So 2 steps again. You can understand where this is going now. One is some kind of identification process where you get a group of people together and they identify the goals, and then you further develop it outside of that group, maybe with 1 or 2 expert people. Again, it's a collaborative workshop. It can be done at the same meeting as the vision. So when you identify the vision or a rough idea of the vision, you can then start to look at goals. The best way of doing this, though, is, that I've seen, is to ensure that prior to the workshop, the project manager and key members of the SAP development team draft a list of provisional goals. So they come up with the expression of straw man, something that can be picked apart by the team as a whole. So you've already got a starting point, so you're not starting from zero. And that provisional list of goals will have approximate timeframes and information about which priority transboundary problem to which they're linked. So it's kind of giving you, to start off with, a kind of a basic set of information, and then that is then reviewed by the whole SAP development team and improved and added to. And then after the workshop, then you then have to go into a much more detailed process of developing a comprehensive list of potential draft goals. And we're talking maybe, there may not be that many, we may be talking about 10 or 20 goals at most. Okay, does that all make complete sense? Yep. Okay, so back into groups again.